Starting your weightlifting journey, whether you are in your own home gym, doing CrossFit, or going to a Globo gym, can be overwhelming for many reasons. One of those reasons can be that you don't know what the heck to think about when you're actually performing exercises. That ends today. I'm Andy Miller, Certified Strength and Conditioning Specialist, and I help you learn as you train and enjoy your lifts again without having to figure it out for yourself. Today we do that by giving you 6 of my favorite cues for lifting weights. These are little phrases or words that you can think about when performing most resistance training exercises. And they will give you the most bang for your buck in terms of being sure the right muscles are engaged and your form is sound. Note that coaching cues click for some people and they don't for others. I hope that at least a few of these make sense to you and you can directly apply them to your training. I want you to pay attention to the purpose of the actual cue. Focus on what the cue is trying to make you do with your body, because you might come up with a different cue that makes more sense for you but achieves the same thing. So let's go ahead and dive into the first one. Tight lats or break the bar. Something you need to learn how to do and build awareness around if you're entering the weightlifting world is to engage your lats. Your lats help lock your shoulder in place as well as your upper and mid back. If you don't know how to flex your lat muscle, another phrase that can help with this is thinking about breaking the bar. Your lats have different muscle fibers running in different directions. And because of where they attach on your humerus, which is your upper arm bone, they actually help with internal rotation, but I want you to think about externally rotating your humerus. If you are holding a bar across your waist or getting set up for a deadlift, think about breaking the bar across your shins or across your waist. That motion typically helps you engage your lats, and you should be able to feel that engagement. When we flex the lat, it closes the space between our arm and our body. So some people, especially when setting up for something like the deadlift, will say to squeeze a lemon in your armpit. In general, keeping the lats engaged, or at least knowing how to keep the lats tight, also allows you to keep the weight close to your body. Not always, but most of the time we want our weight to be close to or over our midline. Engaging the lats can help with this. As I mentioned earlier, it keeps that shoulder packed, so we don't have weights just swinging from a spaghetti arm. Think about doing a walking lunge, an RDL, or even something like a tricep extension. Your lats are going to be engaged for most exercises in order to keep the shoulder in a good position and to minimize excess movement. Thinking about engaging your lats sets your upper back and your mid back in a stable position more often than not. And we want that for most movements that we do in strength and hypertrophy training. I have to say as a caveat that you should be able to move your shoulder blades, which means you need to have the ability to relax and stretch the lat as well as engage it. You don't need to walk around flexing your lats all the time in the gym. Just know how to use them. Next up is whole foot. Put very simply, when doing any closed chained exercise with your feet on the ground, we don't want the foot rolling all over the place, whether that be side to side or front to back. I want you to think about dispersing your weight through your entire foot. You could also say grip the floor, but sometimes this causes people to actually curl their foot, and this is undesirable for weightlifting. Instead, think about spreading your toes and then pressing into the floor. This will still create that really nice arch that we want with your heel, the outside of your foot, the ball of your foot, and all 5 of your toes on the ground. In particular, you want that big toe to stay planted throughout a movement. Use your brain here. Am I as concerned with your foot position during a seated dumbbell shoulder press as I am during a barbell back squat? No. If it's a movement where foot stability makes sense, think about keeping your whole foot planted on the ground and pressing through the entire foot. Moving on to number 3, compress. Specific to bracing, you need to learn how to breathe and brace if you're entering the world of weightlifting, particularly with axial loaded compound movements. That's anything loading the spine. So I used to say ribs down or ribs over hips, and I am still for those cues. I've simply migrated towards the idea of compression since relearning to breathe in my own pre and postpartum experience. The idea with breathing and bracing applies to movements like the squat, the deadlift, overhead pressing, RDLs, maybe even hip thrusts, split squat variations, and some machine work as well. If your spine needs to be stable and neutral and the core isn't relaxed, you can think about this. Also, you may not need to brace all the time, only when intra-abdominal pressure is needed to keep that core stability. So, compressing and keeping the ribs over the hips go hand in hand. Apply it to a squat or a half kneeling overhead press. We want the rib cage stacked over the hips, not flared out to the front. This is all about pressure and alignment management through your midsection. No sucking the belly button to the spine or pushing out, having a power belly, or only thinking about your abs being your rectus abdominis or your six pack. And yes, you should be able to breathe in a braced position. As you take air in, think about expanding through your ribs, down into your stomach and your pelvic floor to your low back, etc., and then compressing all of that like you would a balloon in all directions. If that's too complicated, stick with thinking about engaging your core in a 360-degree fashion and pulling the ribs over the hips. No wobbly pelvises or flared ribs, that's what we're getting at here. Kind of like the foot situation, apply that where it makes sense. Next up is slower down than up. This is in regards to tempo. I cover this in my video on 5 tips for new weightlifters, but I'm putting it in my favorite cues as well because it applies to nearly every exercise you'll do in strength or hypertrophy training. Basically, as you move through an exercise, keep the lowering phase slower than the rising phase. Don't stress about this. The goal is just to use a controlled tempo. As you reach the last reps of any set, the rising or concentric phase will likely get slow. We want that if muscle growth is your goal, but generally try to keep a slower down than up tempo. Before our next one, do you currently use tempo in your training? Let me know down in the comments below. The next cue is screw in. Apply this one to your shoulders or your hips and your feet. You can externally rotate and internally rotate your upper leg bone in your hip socket and your upper arm bone at the shoulder. Screwing in refers to external rotation. This generally helps to, again, engage the lats at the shoulder and the glutes at the hips. The cue is here to generate stability at these joints when doing certain movements. Ideally, with the lower body, your feet are planted, but you screw in by externally rotating your femur. You'll likely need to have a soft knee, so a slight bend in the knee for this to happen. The equivalent to that would be in a push-up, planting the hand and screwing in at the shoulder. So if my hand is on the ground and I externally rotate, that locks in that shoulder. If that cue clicks for you, use it. If not, don't stress. The next one is to find the tension. In any exercise, we want to build proficiency. This cue helps build that mind-muscle connection. In the RDL, instead of thinking butt back or hinge, neither of which are wrong, you could think about finding tension in your hamstrings. In a chest fly, find tension in the pecs. In the lat pull down, find tension in your lats. This works particularly well in exercises that have the highest tension in the stretched position on the muscle. But you can certainly look for the tension in a shortened position as well, like the glutes at the top of a hip thrust or the triceps at the peak of a tricep cable extension. Find the tension, feel the tension. That wraps up my 6 go-to cues for newbies. There can be a lot to think about when starting out on your weightlifting journey. I hope even one of these is helpful in providing some focus in the gym and maybe even get you some better results. If you enjoyed these educated gains, go ahead and like the video and be sure to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.